When Captain James Mitchell became Atlanta's most trusted private jet pilot, wealthy passengers relied on him to fly them safely across the world. But when his amphetamine addiction and human smuggling schemes consumed him, he began transporting kidnapped victims and murdering witnesses who discovered his crimes, turning luxury flights into deadly airborne prisons. Before starting the video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Now, let's get back to the video. The Georgia morning mist clung to Atlanta's private aviation terminal as Captain James Mitchell conducted pre-flight inspections and loaded suspicious cargo containers for what would become the most dangerous flight of his 18-year career as the Southeast's most experienced private jet pilot and charter aviation specialist. At 47 years old, James had established himself as Atlanta's premier corporate pilot, specializing in executive transportation and international charter flights that attracted Fortune 500 executives, entertainment industry professionals, and wealthy families who valued his expertise in navigating complex international airspace and his reputation for providing absolutely discreet aviation services for their most sensitive business and personal travel requirements. James's charter aviation business operated from Atlanta's exclusive private jet terminal, featuring luxury aircraft maintenance facilities, international flight planning systems, and VIP passenger lounges that allowed him to provide first-class aviation services for clients who demanded both flight excellence and complete confidentiality during their global travel activities. His clientele included multinational corporate executives requiring urgent international transportation, celebrities seeking private travel away from media attention, and wealthy entrepreneurs whose business dealings demanded flexible aviation access to remote destinations worldwide. The interior of James's Flight Operations Center reflected his mastery of aviation technology and his understanding of elite passengers' expectations for both flight safety and absolute privacy during their most important travel arrangements, featuring walls displaying aviation certifications from prestigious flight organizations, photographs of successful international flights, and testimonials from grateful clients whose urgent travel needs had been met through his skilled piloting and dedication to aviation excellence. But beneath James's reputation for aviation excellence lay a dangerous combination of amphetamine addiction, systematic human trafficking, and calculated murder that had transformed his charter flights into criminal enterprises where threatening passengers and suspicious investigators met their fate through mid-air accidents and witness elimination during vulnerable international flights. "Good morning, Captain Mitchell," said Victoria Sterling, his 9 o'clock passenger, and a 54-year-old pharmaceutical executive whose urgent business flight to Switzerland required James's aviation expertise for navigating complex European airspace regulations. Victoria had recently noticed irregular flight patterns and suspicious cargo loading procedures during previous flights, and had begun questioning James's explanations about fuel requirements and international aviation protocols that seemed unnecessarily complicated for routine business travel. "Good morning, Mrs. Sterling," James replied with the aviation authority and flight expertise that had made him legendary among Atlanta's business elite, who viewed him as both skilled pilot and travel security specialist, capable of providing safe international transportation while ensuring absolute confidentiality about their business destinations and corporate travel activities during sensitive multinational operations. "I've filed our flight plan for today's Swiss route, and weather conditions are perfect for a smooth flight. The aircraft has been fully inspected and will have priority clearance through European airspace." Victoria had become James's most dangerous passenger, not because of her demanding travel requirements or her international business needs, but because of her recent discovery of unauthorized cargo compartments and her growing awareness of the human trafficking operation that James had been conducting, while supposedly providing legitimate charter aviation services to Atlanta's wealthy business community. What Victoria didn't know was that James had been systematically trafficking humans and murdering suspicious passengers for over 3 years, using his aviation expertise and access to international airspace to transport kidnapped victims while eliminating anyone who discovered his smuggling activities or threatened to report his criminal flight operations. James's transformation from dedicated pilot to calculating killer had begun 5 years earlier, when his amphetamine addiction had escalated from flight alertness enhancement to daily dependency on various stimulant drugs that consumed his substantial aviation income and forced him into desperate relationships with organized crime figures who controlled Georgia's drug distribution networks and international human trafficking operations. His addiction had grown to cost over $900 per day, while his access to private aircraft and international flight routes had provided perfect opportunities for transporting kidnapped victims and conducting smuggling operations that generated millions in profits through coordination with international trafficking networks. Faced with increasing pressure from drug suppliers and potential exposure by suspicious aviation authorities, James had been recruited by international trafficking organizations who recognized his aviation expertise and aircraft access as valuable assets for transporting human cargo across international borders without detection by law enforcement agencies that monitored commercial aviation but had limited oversight of private charter flights. His criminal activities had escalated when several passengers and aviation staff had discovered evidence of unauthorized human cargo and had threatened to report their suspicions to aviation authorities and law enforcement agencies investigating human trafficking patterns utilizing private aircraft and charter aviation services. James had murdered his first victim, a corporate passenger who had detected sounds from hidden cargo compartments, by causing fatal cabin pressure loss during flight that appeared to be mechanical failure rather than deliberate murder. The success of his first murder had convinced James that eliminating threatening passengers and suspicious aviation personnel was both necessary for protecting his trafficking operation and relatively simple to accomplish, given his complete control over aircraft systems and passengers' complete dependence on his aviation expertise during vulnerable flight situations when they were trapped in aircraft at high altitude. Over the following 3 years, James had murdered 8 additional individuals using various aviation methods that took advantage of his flight knowledge, his control over aircraft systems during vulnerable flight operations, and his ability to stage deaths as aviation accidents or mechanical failures that occurred during routine charter flights, with passengers who had no aviation expertise to question his flight decisions or emergency procedures. His victims had been carefully selected based on their discovery of his criminal activities, their potential cooperation with authorities, or their knowledge of trafficking operations that could expose his international smuggling network. His victims had included Dr. Patricia Williams, an aviation safety inspector who had discovered evidence of unauthorized cargo modifications and whose charter flight had resulted in fatal hypoxia from deliberately disabled oxygen systems. Jennifer Martinez, a passenger who had reported suspicious flight activities and whose international flight had ended in fatal turbulence accident from deliberately induced aircraft instability. And David Foster, a federal human trafficking investigator who had been tracking aviation-based smuggling and whose charter flight consultation had resulted in fatal exposure to concentrated carbon monoxide from modified aircraft ventilation systems. Captain Mitchell, I need to discuss some serious concerns about human trafficking and reports of smuggling activities connected to your charter aviation services, said Detective Sarah Rodriguez of the Atlanta Police Department's Human Trafficking Division, as she arrived at the aviation terminal carrying federal warrants to inspect James's aircraft and interview him about suspicious flight activities. Detective Rodriguez specialized in investigating aviation-based trafficking and had developed expertise in recognizing patterns of human smuggling that exploited charter aviation services and passengers' trust in professional pilots during international travel. Detective Rodriguez's investigation represented an existential threat to James's criminal operation, as her law enforcement expertise and access to trafficking databases could expose the systematic smuggling operations and connect him to multiple suspicious deaths during charter flights and aviation consultations. Of course, Detective Rodriguez, James replied, though he felt the familiar surge of amphetamine-induced paranoia and criminal desperation that accompanied any official scrutiny of his aviation operations by law enforcement officers who possessed the training and resources to detect evidence of human trafficking and systematic murder, disguised as aviation accidents or mechanical failures during charter flights. Passenger safety and aviation integrity are always my highest priorities, and I want to cooperate with any investigation that might help protect travelers and ensure that charter aviation operates according to all applicable safety standards and legal requirements. Detective Rodriguez consulted detailed reports from human trafficking investigators and aviation safety analysts that showed patterns of suspicious flight activities and passenger deaths that suggested systematic criminal activity rather than random aviation accidents or legitimate mechanical failures during routine charter flight operations. Captain Mitchell, I've been investigating reports of human trafficking and smuggling activities that appear to be connected to charter flights operated by your aviation business, Detective Rodriguez said with the investigative precision that had made her successful in solving complex trafficking cases. 8 individuals who were passengers or staff members involved with your charter flights have died under suspicious circumstances, with several of these deaths occurring after the victims had discovered evidence of unauthorized cargo or had questioned irregular flight procedures during their aviation travel. The detective's identification of the trafficking patterns and her recognition of the timing correlation between discovery of criminal activities and passenger deaths confirmed James's worst fears that his criminal activities had been analyzed and connected to a systematic elimination of suspicious passengers and exploitation of aviation access for organized human trafficking and international smuggling operations. James's response was swift and deadly, as he realized that eliminating Detective Rodriguez was essential for protecting his criminal enterprise and preventing exposure of his systematic trafficking and murder operations. Detective Rodriguez, I think there may be some misunderstanding about the complex nature of international aviation and the unfortunate reality that charter passengers sometimes experience medical emergencies during high-altitude flight, despite the most advanced safety equipment and emergency procedures, James said while discreetly reaching for a modified oxygen mask that he had rigged to deliver concentrated nitrogen instead of oxygen for emergency elimination of law enforcement threats through rapid asphyxiation. Perhaps we could discuss these concerns aboard my aircraft where I can demonstrate the safety systems that might explain these tragic incidents. Aviation safety involves complex technical systems that might appear suspicious to those unfamiliar with advanced flight operations and international aviation protocols. Detective Rodriguez agreed to examine James's aircraft safety systems, not realizing that the pilot was leading her to a modified aircraft cabin where previous murders had been committed and where James planned to kill her using weaponized oxygen equipment that would cause fatal asphyxiation while appearing to be accidental exposure to aviation safety equipment malfunction. James's plan involved convincing Detective Rodriguez to test specific emergency oxygen procedures while explaining aviation safety protocols, then activating the modified mask system to deliver pure nitrogen that would cause rapid unconsciousness and death while appearing to be accidental malfunction of aircraft safety equipment rather than deliberate murder by a pilot protecting his trafficking and smuggling operations. But James's carefully planned murder of the detective was about to be prevented by the unexpected arrival of federal agents who had been investigating international human trafficking networks and had identified connections to his charter aviation business. Special Agent Michael Torres of the FBI's Human Trafficking Division had been conducting a comprehensive investigation into international human smuggling and aviation-based trafficking operations that exploited charter flight services to transport victims across international borders while eliminating potential witnesses to criminal activities. Agent Torres specialized in investigating aviation crimes and human trafficking and had developed expertise in tracking criminal pilots who were used to transport human cargo while conducting systematic elimination of threats to international trafficking networks. The federal investigation had been initiated by reports from multiple international law enforcement agencies and aviation regulators who had noticed patterns of suspicious charter flight activities and trafficking-related deaths that suggested organized criminal networks were using private aviation to transport kidnapped victims while eliminating potential witnesses through sophisticated aviation-based poisoning methods disguised as flight accidents. Agent Torres had been conducting surveillance of James's trafficking coordination activities and aviation operations and had documented evidence of systematic amphetamine abuse, involvement in human smuggling, and suspicious patterns of passenger deaths that suggested his aviation expertise was being used for organized criminal activity rather than legitimate charter flight services. "Captain James Mitchell, I'm Special Agent Torres with the FBI," he announced as he boarded the aircraft where James was preparing to poison Detective Rodriguez. "I have federal warrants for your arrest on charges of international human trafficking, systematic aviation fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and multiple counts of first-degree murder related to your systematic exploitation of charter aviation services for criminal smuggling activities and international trafficking operations." James's reaction to the federal agent's intervention was a combination of aviation authority confusion and desperate attempts to maintain his pilot credibility, as he realized that law enforcement agencies at multiple levels had been investigating his trafficking activities and had connected them to systematic passenger murders and organized smuggling operations. His carefully maintained reputation as a respected pilot had failed to protect him from comprehensive investigation by agencies with expertise in aviation crimes and international human trafficking. "Special Agent Torres, there must be some serious misunderstanding about legitimate charter aviation and the complex flight protocols involved in international transportation that requires specialized aircraft modifications and advanced safety systems," James said frantically, while abandoning his plan to poison Detective Rodriguez and attempting to preserve some semblance of aviation professionalism despite the overwhelming evidence against his criminal activities. "I am a certified commercial pilot with 18 years of experience providing charter aviation services for Atlanta's most successful business professionals and their international travel requirements. All of my flight operations comply with established aviation standards and safety protocols designed to ensure passenger security and flight excellence." Detective Rodriguez looked absolutely stunned as she realized how close she had come to being murdered by the pilot she had been investigating for human trafficking. Her trafficking investigation had not only exposed James's smuggling and murder operation, but it also prevented her own death at the hands of a killer who had been using charter aviation as cover for systematic elimination of passengers and law enforcement threats. The comprehensive investigation that followed James's arrest revealed the full scope of his criminal enterprise and the sophisticated methods he had developed to exploit aviation expertise for systematic human trafficking and murder. Forensic analysis of James's aviation operations revealed extensive evidence of his trafficking activities, including sophisticated aircraft modifications for concealing human cargo, international networks for coordinating smuggling operations, and detailed records showing coordination between victim transport and passenger elimination schedules. His aircraft contained weaponized aviation equipment, amphetamine trafficking documentation, and comprehensive files containing flight records that had been falsified to conceal international human smuggling operations. The investigation also uncovered James's connections to international organized crime figures who'd been coordinating human trafficking and drug distribution operations, while using his aviation expertise to transport kidnapped victims and eliminate potential witnesses through sophisticated aviation-based poisoning methods disguised as flight accidents. Most disturbing was the discovery of James's detailed knowledge of aviation systems and atmospheric physiology, which he had used to develop increasingly sophisticated methods for causing death through aircraft systems while eliminating passengers who discovered his trafficking operations or threatened to expose his criminal activities to authorities. Captain James Mitchell was ultimately convicted of 9 counts of first-degree murder, systematic human trafficking, international aviation fraud, conspiracy to commit organized criminal enterprise activities, and numerous other charges related to his exploitation of charter aviation services for criminal smuggling activities and international trafficking operations. The conviction sent unprecedented shockwaves throughout Atlanta's aviation community, prompting immediate reforms in charter flight oversight, aircraft inspection protocols, and amphetamine addiction prevention measures designed to protect passengers from exploitation by trusted aviation professionals involved in organized criminal activities. Several other pilots and charter aviation operators were investigated for similar criminal activities, resulting in enhanced oversight of flight operations and new requirements for cargo verification, passenger protection, and aviation safety measures that made it more difficult for criminals to exploit charter aviation for systematic trafficking and murder. Detective Rodriguez and Special Agent Torres received recognition for their collaborative investigation and became specialists in aviation crime investigation, developing new techniques for identifying trafficking operations and protecting passengers from exploitation by criminal aviation professionals. Victoria Sterling and other surviving passengers required extensive flight record verification and aviation security consultations to overcome the trauma of learning that their trusted pilot had been systematically trafficking humans and murdering passengers while exploiting his aviation access for organized criminal activities. The charter aviation industry implemented comprehensive new safety protocols designed to protect passengers from exploitation by unethical aviation providers. The case prompted comprehensive changes in charter aviation regulation, including mandatory background checks and drug testing for all commercial pilots, enhanced oversight of aircraft modifications and cargo procedures, real-time monitoring of flight operations and passenger manifests, and new reporting procedures for suspicious aviation activities involving passenger safety or potential trafficking indicators. James's conviction also led to increased cooperation between aviation industry organizations and law enforcement agencies, investigating organized crime with new protocols designed to identify charter aviation services that might be exploiting their flight access for systematic criminal activities while eliminating potential witnesses. The charter aviation and broader transportation industries implemented revolutionary new safety measures, including enhanced screening procedures for aviation professionals, comprehensive passenger protection programs, mandatory reporting of suspicious flight activities, and improved training for recognizing signs of amphetamine addiction and organized crime involvement among pilots. 5 years after James's conviction and life imprisonment, Atlanta's aviation community continued to implement safeguards designed to protect passengers from pilots who might abuse their positions of trust and flight access for criminal purposes. The pilot, who had promised to provide safe transportation and professional aviation services, had instead used his flight expertise and aircraft access to commit systematic human trafficking and murder while exploiting passengers' vulnerability and trust during their most dependent travel moments at high altitude. However, his crimes had been thoroughly exposed and his victims had found justice through the dedication of investigators who refused to accept aviation deaths as mere flight accidents. Captain James Mitchell's final flight had been permanently grounded by the navigational precision of justice, where he would serve multiple life sentences without possibility of parole, proving that even aviation professionals who attempted to exploit their flight expertise for criminal gain could be identified, investigated, and brought to justice when dedicated law enforcement agencies worked together to protect innocent passengers from predatory pilots. The pilot's final flight had ended with his permanent removal from the cockpit, serving as a lasting reminder that those entrusted with aviation safety must never abuse that sacred responsibility, and that aviation professionals who would exploit passenger vulnerability and flight trust for criminal gain will ultimately face the full consequences of their betrayal of aviation integrity and human safety. Thank you very much for listening. Please let us know what you think of this story in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any other videos.